Porsche killed the Boxster, killed the Cayman, and killed the gas-powered Macan, and then quietly admitted that all of it had been a mistake. But by the time that admission came, the damage ran far deeper than a few discontinued models. 65% of their Chinese dealers refused to order new cars in an organized revolt against headquarters. A smartphone company called Xiaomi broke the Taycan's Nürburgring lap record using a sedan that costs a fraction of the price. And in 2025, the most profitable car company in the world reported an automotive margin of 0.3%. Not 3%, 0.3. We're going to break down every bad bet, every wrong turn, and the one decision that triggered the whole chain reaction. What's unfolding inside Porsche right now runs far wilder than anything the glossy press releases suggest. A few years ago, calling Porsche vulnerable would have sounded ridiculous. This wasn't a company showing cracks. Porsche held the title of most profitable volume car maker on the planet, with management targeting margins of 17 to 19%, numbers that most automakers will never touch in their lifetimes. Two enormous tailwinds carried the brand at the same time: China's booming appetite for luxury cars and the worldwide push toward electric vehicles. China alone absorbed over 30% of every Porsche produced, and the Cayenne and Macan printed money quarter after quarter, while the brand reached heights it had never seen before. Leadership felt so confident about the road ahead that they committed to making 80% of all sales fully electric by 2030. Every signal pointed upward, and then almost all at once, every single one of those bets turned against them. The collapse started in the one market that mattered most. 8 consecutive years. That's how long China reigned as Porsche's #1 market on Earth. At the 2021 peak, Porsche delivered nearly 96,000 cars into China alone, representing more than 30% of total global volume. China didn't just matter to Porsche, it powered the entire machine. And then the numbers fell off a cliff. Deliveries dropped 15% in 2023, cratered another 28% in 2024, and slid a further 26% in 2025, landing at just under 42,000 units. Add those years together, and what you get is roughly a 60% collapse from peak to present, shrinking China's share from over 30% of global sales to about 15%, while the country fell from Porsche's largest market to its third, behind North America and Europe. But here's the thing, the Chinese economy alone didn't crush Porsche. Chinese car companies did. Brands that most Americans have never encountered now dominate the segments Porsche once owned. December of 2025 offered a perfect snapshot when a car called the Maestro S800, built through a partnership between Huawei and JAC Motors, outsold the Porsche Panamera, the BMW 7 Series, and the Mercedes-Maybach S-Class, combined in China's premium segment. One vehicle from a tech company outsold 3 of the most storied nameplates in automotive history, combined, and then Xiaomi delivered the knockout punch. Their SU7 Ultra, a 1,500-plus horsepower electric sedan, lapped the Nürburgring on April 1st, 2026 in 7 minutes and 4.9 seconds, shattering the Taycan Turbo GT's record of 7 minutes and 7.5 seconds that had stood since September of 2023. Xiaomi pulled it off with a production car priced at a fraction of the Taycan Turbo GT in China. These companies aren't building knockoffs anymore. They're building cars that outrun Porsche, out-tech Porsche, and undercut Porsche all at once. And Stuttgart had no answer ready. What I'm about to describe next almost never happens in the luxury car business, and the fact that it happened to Porsche tells you everything about the speed of this decline. Late May of 2024, brought one of the most underreported stories in the auto industry, when Porsche's Chinese dealers did something almost unheard of for any luxury brand. They organized and they fought back. A joint letter landed directly at Porsche headquarters in Stuttgart carrying a blunt message. We're being forced to accept cars we can't sell, and every unit costs us money. Reports indicated that roughly 65% of Chinese dealers stopped placing new orders entirely, while several others refused to sign their 2024 sales targets. Dealer groups demanded gross profit subsidies of 1 to 4 percentage points just to stay operational. Consider what that means in practice. These weren't random small businesses airing grievances. Porsche's own hand-picked partners, the people who built showrooms, hired staff, and poured millions into the promise of selling a premium product at premium prices, were publicly declaring that the model no longer worked. On May 27, 2024, Porsche China issued a joint statement with its dealers acknowledging that, quote, during the industry transformation and transition period, automobile manufacturers must actively listen to the voices from frontline dealers. That translates neatly into corporate language for, we hear you, but we don't have an answer. No concrete remedies followed, and by the end of 2025, Porsche had slashed its Chinese dealer network from around 150 locations down to 114, with plans to shrink further toward 80 in 2026. Dong'an Holding Group suspended operations at 2 more Porsche dealerships in December of 2025 as the price war ground on. The revolt didn't cause Porsche's decline, but it tore the curtain back and exposed just how badly things had deteriorated at street level. And yet China wasn't even the biggest mistake Porsche made, because the biggest wound came from their own hand. This chapter frustrates car enthusiasts more than any other because none of it needed to happen this way. Porsche committed to reaching 80% electric sales by 2030. An enormous gamble for any automaker, but an especially reckless one for a brand whose identity lives in flat sixes and turbocharged Boxster engines. Making that target real meant going all in. Porsche axed the gas-powered Macan and ended production of the combustion 718 Boxster and Cayman in October of 2025. And here's the painful part, right as sales of those exact models were climbing. Everything funneled behind the Taycan and a pipeline of electric replacements that hadn't arrived yet. The Taycan carried the burden of proving that Porsche could build EVs better than anyone, and instead it became the clearest symbol of the strategy's collapse. Deliveries fell 49% in 2024, dropped another 22% in 2025, and production got cut to a single shift. What nobody expected was the speed of the reversal that followed. Porsche abandoned the 80% EV target, delayed the electric 718 to around 2027, pushed the K1 electric flagship out to approximately 2029 without requiring it to be EV only, and in June of 2026, the new CEO ruled out an electric 911 entirely. And that U-turn carried a price tag. Roughly $3.9 billion in write-downs landed in a single year, split between about $2.6 billion for product strategy realignment, roughly $760 million for battery activities, and another $760 million tied to U.S. tariff impacts. That one charge turned a company printing money into one barely breaking even. Most of that $3.9 billion consisted of non-cash accounting charges, sunk costs, and lowered long-term expectations. Porsche still generated about $1.6 billion in positive automotive free cash flow during 2025, so the company isn't bleeding out. But years of product development erased and credibility shattered. Those don't appear on any balance sheet. Which raises an obvious question. Who steered the company into this wall? And that's where this story takes an even stranger turn. September of 2022 brought one of the oddest arrangements in corporate history, when Oliver Blume took on the CEO role at both Volkswagen Group and Porsche AG simultaneously. Picture a single person running a massive industrial conglomerate that sells everything from budget hatchbacks to Lamborghinis, while also navigating a luxury sports car brand through the hardest transition in its modern existence. Industry watchers raised alarms from day one, and as the problems multiplied, with China collapsing, the EV strategy misfiring, and margins evaporating, that criticism grew steadily louder. February of 2025 brought the first casualties when Porsche ousted CFO Lutz Meschke and head of sales Detlev von Platen, with no official reasons given, though von Platen reportedly shouldered internal blame for the China weakness. October of 2025 brought the biggest move of all, the announcement that Blume himself would step aside as Porsche CEO. His replacement, Michael Leiters, carried a resume that reads like a tour through sports car royalty. Over 13 years at Porsche earlier in his career running the Cayman and Macan programs, followed by more than 8 years as Ferrari's chief technology officer and then a stint as CEO of McLaren. Every legendary sports car company that exists had his fingerprints on it at some point. Leaders assumed control on January 1st, 2026, and moved with urgency. Within months, he launched Strategy 2035, sold Porsche's stake in Bugatti Rimac, shut down battery and software side ventures, and cut over 500 jobs. And he said something his predecessor had been reluctant to admit, that discontinuing the combustion Macan had been a mistake. That kind of candor counts for something, but the real test is whether it arrived soon enough. Most people miss this layer when they talk about Porsche. The company doesn't operate independently. Volkswagen Group owns 75% of Porsche, and VW itself sits deep in its own crisis. Net profit at VW Group fell 44% in 2025, hitting the lowest mark since the Dieselgate scandal back in 2016, while operating margins sank to 2.8%. The group responded by announcing 50,000 job cuts across Germany by 2030, and somewhere between 1,900 and 3,900 of those cuts land directly at Porsche. For years, Porsche and Audi functioned as VW's profit engines, the two brands that subsidized everything else in the portfolio. When both stumbled at the same time, VW lost the financial backbone that held the entire group together. And VW's China trajectory mirrors Porsche's own. The group surrendered its decades-long reign as #1 automaker in China, falling behind BYD first, then dropping behind Geely into third. That structure creates a tension that won't resolve easily. Porsche needs the speed and focus of an independent luxury brand, but 75% of it belongs to a conglomerate that's closing factories, cutting tens of thousands of workers, and scrambling to figure out its own future. Whether Porsche can carve out a truly independent path under that arrangement remains one of the biggest open questions in the industry. If luxury cars were struggling across the board, you could frame Porsche as a victim of bad timing. One company destroys that argument completely, and that company is Ferrari. While Porsche's automotive margin sat at 0.3% in 2025, Ferrari posted an operating margin of 29.5%, with revenue climbing 7% and net profit landing around $1.7 billion. Ferrari's order book stretches toward the end of 2027, and CEO Benedetto Vigna put it clearly when he confirmed Ferrari's carefully managed volume strategy, with margins expanding yet again. 29.5% against 0.3% under the same broad market conditions, producing radically different outcomes. Ferrari delivered only about 13,600 cars in 2025, compared to Porsche's 279,000. Hybrids entered the Ferrari lineup gradually, without torching their combustion heritage, and Ferrari never staked its identity on 80% EV targets, or let any single country dominate more than a fraction of total sales. Porsche chased volume, chased China, and chased an all-electric future before the market caught up, while Ferrari stayed disciplined and let the results pile up. That contrast alone proves this crisis belongs to Porsche specifically, not to the luxury car business as a whole. And yet the full picture holds a surprise that pushes back against the doom narrative, because one car in the Porsche lineup tells a completely different story. One number doesn't fit anything we've been talking about. In 2025, the same year everything collapsed around it, the Porsche 911 set an all-time delivery record at over 51,000 units. The most iconic nameplate in the lineup, the car enthusiasts care about above all others, posted its strongest year ever while the rest of the company fell apart. Revenue per vehicle climbed to about $132,000 from roughly $128,000 the year before, which means buyers are paying more, not less, for the Porsches they actually want. Pricing power on the models that matter hasn't gone anywhere. First quarter 2026 told a mixed story, with deliveries falling almost 15% and China sliding another 21%, but operating margins came in at 7.1%, which lands at the upper end of guidance. That sits a long way from the 17% Porsche once targeted, but an even longer way from 0.3%, and the direction for now is upward. Porsche management calls 2025 the absolute bottom. UBS analyst Patrick Hummel published a note in June of 2026 titled, "The Icon Strikes Back," projecting that margins could recover to 13% by 2030. He described it as a multi-year effort to restore Porsche's old strength. Barclays took the opposite position back in January, arguing that the damage, especially in China, runs structural rather than cyclical, and that Chinese brands have permanently redrawn the competitive map. Which side turns out to be right depends entirely on what happens over the next 12 to 18 months. Porsche isn't dying. Positive cash flow still comes in, the 911 still rolls off the line, and the brand name still carries weight that money can't buy. But the version of Porsche that existed just a few years ago, the unstoppable growth machine running 17% margins on the back of China and an all-electric roadmap, that company is already gone. And it didn't vanish because of one piece of bad luck. It collapsed under a chain of decisions that each seemed reasonable on their own and turned into a disaster when they combined. Leaning too hard into China without a fallback came first. Killing beloved combustion models before their electric replacements arrived made things worse. Committing to an 80% EV target that the market never validated accelerated the damage. Splitting the CEO's attention between two companies during the most critical transition in Porsche's modern history removed the last safety net. And by the time the course correction came, nearly $4 billion had already been written off. Whatever Porsche becomes next will look different from what came before. Leaner, more flexible across powertrains, less exposed to China, and led by a new CEO who has already shown willingness to call out mistakes and cut what isn't working. The real test arrives later this year when Porsche presents its full strategy 2035 plan, which will reveal whether we're watching a genuine turnaround or just the early chapters of a much longer fall.